Next, we are going to discuss the fourth module of our macroeconomics, that is New Keynesian economics. It includes the fall and rise of Keynesian economics, the historical background, the Keynesian resurgence, New Keynesian economics, the core propositions and features of New Keynesian economics. It includes normal rigidities, real rigidities, small menu cost model, implicit wage contract model, efficiency wage theories, insider-outsider model, the new Keynesian business cycle theory, then hysteresis and Nairo, then policy implications. Introduction. New Keynesian economics is a school of contemporary macroeconomics that strives to provide microeconomic foundations for Keynesian economics. It developed partially as a response to criticisms of Keynesian macroeconomics by adherents of new classical macroeconomics. അതായത് ന്യൂ ക്ലാസിക്കൽ എക്കണോമിക്സിൻ്റെ വരവോട് കൂടിയിട്ട് കെയ്നീഷ്യൻ എക്കണോമിക്സ് മെയിൻ സ്ട്രീമിൽ നിന്ന് പാടെ അപ്രത്യക്ഷമാവുന്ന ഒരു അവസ്ഥ ഉണ്ടാവുകയും അപ്പോൾ കെയ്നീഷ്യൻ എക്കണോമിക്സിൻ്റെ ന്യൂനതകളെ കറക്റ്റ് ചെയ്തുകൊണ്ട് വീണ്ടും മുഖ്യധാരയിലോട്ട് കൊണ്ടുവരാൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് അവതരിപ്പിക്കുകയാണ് ന്യൂ കെയ്നീഷ്യൻ മാക്രോ എക്കണോമിക്സ്. New Keynesian economics is a modern macroeconomic school of thought that evolved from classical Keynesian economics. This revised theory differs from classical Keynesian thinking in terms of how quickly prices and wages adjust. അതായത് സ്റ്റിക്കി പ്രൈസസിനും വേജ് റിജിഡിറ്റിയും ഈ രണ്ട് കോൺസെപ്റ്റുകളാണ് കെയ്നീഷ്യൻ എക്കണോമിക്സുകൾ കൂടുതൽ ഊന്നൽ കൊടുക്കുന്നത്. നെക്സ്റ്റ്, the term New Keynesian. Although the term New Keynesian was first used by Parkin and Wade in 1982 in their textbook on modern macroeconomics, it is clear that this line of thought had been conceived in the 1970s during the first phase of the New Classical Revolution. The burgeoning New Keynesian literature since then has been primarily concerned with the search for rigorous and convincing models of wage and or price stickiness based on maximizing behavior of rational expectations. അതായത് മൈക്കൽ പാക്കിൻ ആണ് ദ ടേം ഫസ്റ്റ് യൂസ് ചെയ്തത്. അദ്ദേഹം പറയുന്നത് നിയോ ക്ലാസിക്കൽ എക്കണോമിസ്റ്റുകൾ ആർഗ്യൂ ചെയ്യുന്നത് ആബ്സെൻസ് ഓഫ് മാർക്കറ്റ് ക്ലിയറിംഗ് ആണ്. അവിടെ ഡിമാൻഡ് ആൻഡ് സപ്ലൈ എപ്പോഴും തുല്യമാവണമെന്നില്ല എന്നാണ്. അതായത് ന്യൂ കെയ്നീഷ്യൻ എക്കണോമിസ്റ്റുകൾ സ്റ്റിക്കി പ്രൈസസിനും വേജ് റിജിഡിറ്റിയും ഈ രണ്ട് കോൺസെപ്റ്റുകളിലാണ് കൂടുതൽ ഇമ്പോർട്ടൻസ് കൊടുക്കുന്നത്. അവിടെ അഭിപ്രായത്തിൽ നമ്മുടെ എക്കോണമിയിൽ ഇൻവോളണ്ടറി അൺഎംപ്ലോയ്മെൻ്റ് ഉണ്ട്. അതിന് കാരണം സ്റ്റിക്കി പ്രൈസസും വേജ് റിജിഡിറ്റിയുമാണ്. New Keynesian economics developed in response to the perceived theoretical crisis within Keynesian economics, which had been exposed by Lucas during the 1970s. The paramount task facing Keynesian theorists is to remedy the theoretical flaws and inconsistencies of the old Keynesian model. Therefore, New Keynesian theorist aims to construct a coherent theory of aggregate supply and wage and price rigidities can be rationalized. Then, New Keynesian advocates maintain that prices and wages are sticky, meaning they adjust more slowly to short-term economic fluctuations. This in turn explains such economic factors as involuntary unemployment and the impact of federal monetary policies. This way of thinking became dominant force in academic macroeconomics from the 1990s through the financial crisis of 2008. അതായത് നമ്മൾ പറയുകയുണ്ടായി നമ്മുടെ എക്കോണമിയിൽ ഇൻവോളണ്ടറി അൺഎംപ്ലോയ്മെൻ്റ് ഉണ്ട്. അതിന് കാരണം സ്റ്റിക്കി പ്രൈസസും വേജ് റിജിഡിറ്റിയുമാണ്. അതുപോലെ തന്നെ മോണിറ്ററി പോളിസി വളരെ ഇഫക്റ്റീവ് ആണെന്നാണ് നമ്മുടെ ന്യൂ കെയ്നീഷ്യൻ ഇക്കണോമിസ്റ്റുകൾ അഭിപ്രായപ്പെടുന്നത്. ന്യൂ ക്ലാസിക്കൽസ് ആർഗ്യൂ ചെയ്തിരുന്നത് എക്കോണമിയിൽ ഒരു ഇൻവോളണ്ടറി അൺഎംപ്ലോയ്മെൻ്റ് ഉണ്ടെന്നാണ്. പക്ഷേ ന്യൂ കെയ്നീഷ്യൻ ഇക്കണോമിസ്റ്റ് പറയുന്നത് പ്രൈസ് ചേഞ്ച് ചെയ്യുന്നതിന് ഫേംസ് ഒരുപാട് ഉത്തരവാദിത്തമുണ്ട്. അതാണ് മെനി കോസ്റ്റ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. അതായത് കണ്ടിന്യൂസ് പ്രൈസ് അഡ്ജസ്റ്റ്മെൻറ്റ് അവർ ഒരിക്കലും ഫേവർ ചെയ്യുന്നില്ല. ദ ന്യൂ കെയ്നീഷ്യൻ തിയറി attempts to address among their other things the sluggish behavior of prices and its cause and how market failures could be caused by inefficiencies and might justify government intervention. The benefits of government intervention remains a flashpoint for debate. New Keynesian economics made a case for expansionary monetary policy, arguing that deficit spending encourages saving rather than increasing demand or economic growth. Next, we are going to discuss the major difference between neoclassical and Keynesian theory. First of all, the key concepts like behavior, markets, money, unemployment, and policy. Then, how to differentiate between these concepts into the neoclassical and Keynesian theory. Then, the major key concept in the neoclassical theory is rational behavior and equilibrium. But on the other hand, the Keynesian theory and the main concept include the effective demand and animal spirit. In the case of behavior, rational behavior by selfish individuals are focused on neoclassical theory. Then animal spirit, non-rational behavior and conventional behavior deals with in the Keynesian theory. Then markets. In the case of market, neoclassical theory mainly focused on market clearing, that is price adjustment. But in the case of Keynesian theory, some markets does not clear. Then in the case of money, classical dichotomy, money is neutral in the case of neoclassical theory. But in the Keynesian theory, money does matters, has real effects. In the case of unemployment, neoclassical theory mainly focusing on the voluntary or due to rigidities, voluntary unemployment or due to rigidities. Then in the case of Keynesian economics, involuntary unemployment due to lack of demand on goods market. Finally, in the case of policy, laissez-faire policy has adopted and the markets are self-regulating and government should not intervene. But in the case of Keynesian theory, market economies are unstable and result in unemployment and the government should intervene. A Keynesian resurgence. Lucas' obituary of Keynesian economics can now be seen to have been premature because Robert Barro's bad guys have made a comeback, Barrow 1989. So there are a number of works related to the Keynesian resurgence by the mid in 1980s, Howitt in 1986, then Blinder was discussing the Keynes after Lucas in 1986, the fall and rise of Keynesian economics in 1988. By the early 1990s, Blinder announced that a Keynesian restoration is here in 1992, Mankiw, then Thorvald. All these are mainly enthusiastically discussed the Keynesian Renaissance. While in the late 1980s, the Keynesian promised land was not yet in sight, Blinder in 1988 believed we may at long last be emerging from the arid desert and looking over the Jordan. So, in answering his own 1977 the question about the death of Keynesian economics, Tobin in 1987 later provided an unequivocal answers in his essay The Future of Keynesian Economics. Then one reason Keynesian economics has a future is that rival theories of economic fluctuations will not. I hazard the prediction that neither of the two species of business cycle theory offered by new classical macroeconomics will be regarded as a serious and credible explanations of economic fluctuations a few years from now. Whatever cycle theory emerges in a new synthesis will have important Keynesian elements. Keynesian economics has a feature because it is essential to the explanation and understanding of a host of observations and experiences past and present that alternative macroeconomic approaches do not illuminate. Tobin in 1996 was particularly critical of the elegant fantasies of the Robinson Crusoe macroeconomics of real business cycle theory because it ignores the coordination question in macroeconomics. Key economists such as Aklov, Stiglitz, Tobin, and Leigh John Hopard, an essential task of macroeconomic theory is to explain in what circumstances the invisible hand does and does not efficiently coordinate the economic behavior of the numerous diverse agents. Certainly, the persistence of high unemployment in Europe during the 1980 and 1990s also called into question the possibility of equilibrium explanations of the business cycle while also providing increasing credibility to Keynesian theory and policy. Then main propositions. The central analytical message of the orthodox Keynesian school comprise the following main propositions. The first one, an unregulated market economy will experience prolonged periods of excess supply of output and labor in contradiction to Say's law of markets. That is, Keynes' terminology, market economies will exhibit unemployment equilibrium. And the second point, aggregate macroeconomic instability, that is business cycles, are mainly caused by aggregate demand disturbances. And the third point, money matters. Most of the time, although in very deep recessions, monetary policy may be ineffective. And the fourth point, government intervention in the form of stabilization policy has the potential to improve macroeconomic stability and economic welfare. Next, new Keynesian economics. New Keynesian economics emerged mainly as a response to the theoretical crisis facing Keynesian economies that emerged during the 1970s. In their brief survey of new Keynesian economics, Mankiw and Romer in 1991 defined new Keynesian economics with reference to the answer a particular theory gives to the following pair of questions. The question 1, does the theory violate the classical dichotomy? That is money non-neutral? And the second question, does the theory assume that real market imperfections in the economy are crucial for understanding economic fluctuations? Of the mainstream school, only new Keynesians answer both the questions in the affirmative. Non-neutralities arise from sticky prices and market imperfections explain this behavior of prices. Then the core propositions and features of new Keynesian economics. Most new Keynesian models assume that expectations are formed rationally. This is clearly one area where the new classical revolution of the 1970s has had a profound effect on the macroeconomics in general. However, some prominent Keynesians, അതായത് Blender in 1987, Phelps in 1992, as well as some economists within the orthodox monetarist school Leitler in 1992, remain critical of the theoretical foundations and question the empirical support for the rational expectation hypothesis. Hence, although the incorporation of the rational expectations in new Keynesian model is the norm, this need not always be the case. Here, although new Keynesian economists share an interest in improving the supply-side Keynesian models, they hold a wide diversity of views relating to policy issues such as the debate over the importance of discretion rather than rules in the conduct of fiscal and monetary policy. New Keynesians regard both supply and demand shocks as potential sources of instability, but part company with real business cycle theorists. Popularly, when it comes to an assessment of market economy's capacity to observe such shocks so that equilibrium, that is full employment, is maintained. Many new Keynesians also share Keynes' view that involuntary unemployment is both possible and likely. New Keynesian economists inhabit a brave new theoretical world characterized by imperfect competition, incomplete markets, heterogeneous labor and asymmetric information, and where agents are frequently concerned with fairness. As a result, real macro world as seen through new Keynesian eyes is characterized by the possibility of coordination failures and macroeconomic externalities. Nominal rigidities and real rigidity. To divide the explanations of rigidities between those that focus on nominal rigidities and those that focus on real rigidities. A nominal rigidity occurs if something prevents the nominal price level from adjusting so as exactly to mimic nominal demand disturbances. A real rigidity, on the other hand, occurs if some factor prevents real wages from adjusting, or there is stickiness of one wage related to another or of one price related to another. So both orthodox and new Keynesian approaches assume that price adjusts slowly following a disturbance. But unlike the Keynesian Cross or ISLM approaches, which arbitrarily assume fixed nominal wages and prices, the new Keynesian approach seeks to provide a microeconomic underpinning for the slow adjustment of both wages and prices. അതായത് ന്യൂ കെയ്നീഷ്യൻ അപ്രോച്ചസിൽ കൂടുതലായിട്ട് പ്രൈസ് വേജ് റിജിഡിക്കാണ് ഫോക്കസ് കൊടുക്കുന്നത്. മണി പ്രൈസ് ആൻഡ് വേജസ് ഫ്ലെക്സിബിൾ അല്ല. ഫ്ലെക്സിബിൾ സിറ്റുവേഷൻ ഇൻ ദി ന്യൂ ക്ലാസിക്കൽ മോഡലായിരുന്നു. പക്ഷേ ഇവിടെ പ്രൈസും വേജും റിജിഡ് ആണെന്നാണ് പറയുന്നത്. ഓൺലി ദ സ്ലോ അഡ്ജസ്റ്റ്മെൻറ്റ് ഓഫ് ബോത്ത് വേജസ് ആൻഡ് പ്രൈസസ്. ദെൻ നോമിനൽ വേജ് റിജിഡിറ്റി. In traditional Keynesian models, the price level is prevented from falling to restore equilibrium by the failure of money wages to adjust. അതായത് ട്രഡീഷണൽ കെനീഷ്യൻ മോഡലിൽ പ്രൈസ് ലെവൽ കുറയ്ക്കുന്നതിനെ അവർ പ്രിവെൻറ്റ് ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ടായിരുന്നു. To restore equilibrium by the failure of money wages to adjust. So in the new classical models developed by Lucas, Surgeon, Wallace and Barrow during the 1970s, anticipated monetary disturbances will cause an immediate jump of nominal wages and prices to their new equilibrium values of preserving output and employment. So in such a world, systematic monetary policy is ineffective. New classical models in the developers ആയിട്ടുള്ള ലുക്കാസ്, സർജൻ, വാലസ്, ബാരോ in 1970s അവർ പറയുന്നത് മണി ഡിസ്റ്റർബൻസസ്, അതായത് മോണിറ്ററി ഡിസ്റ്റർബൻസസ്, പ്രൈസസിൽ എന്തെങ്കിലും വേരിയേഷൻസ് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ വേജ് ലെവലിൽ എന്തെങ്കിലും വേരിയേഷൻസ് ഉണ്ടായിക്കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ അത് ഇമ്മീഡിയറ്റ് ജമ്പ് ഓഫ് നോമിനൽ വേജസ് ആൻഡ് പ്രൈസസ് ടു ദെയർ ന്യൂ ഇക്വിലിബ്രിയം വാല്യൂസ്, അവരുടെ ന്യൂ ഇക്വിലിബ്രിയം വാല്യൂസിൽ വേരിയേഷൻ വരികയും ഔട്ട്പുട്ടിലും എംപ്ലോയ്മെൻറ്റിലും എല്ലാത്തിലും വേരിയേഷൻസ് വന്നുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കും. So in the early Keynesian attempt to fortify their theoretical structure concentrated on nominal wage rigidities, and the models developed by Fisher in 1977 and Tyler in 1980 introduced a nominal inertia in the following long-term wage contracts. അതായത് കെയ്ൻസിൻ്റെ അഭിപ്രായത്തിൽ മുതലാളിത്ത സമ്പദ് വ്യവസ്ഥയിൽ നിലനിൽക്കുന്ന തൊഴിലില്ലായ്മയുടെ പ്രധാന കാരണം എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് വേജ് കുറയ്ക്കാനുള്ള പ്രവണത കാണിക്കുകയാണ്, അതായത് ഡൗൺവേർഡ് റിജിഡിറ്റി ഓഫ് വേജസ് ആൻഡ് പ്രൈസസ്. സോ അത് നമ്മുടെ കെനീഷ്യൻ ന്യൂ അറ്റംപ്റ്റ്സിൽ അവർ ഫോളോ ചെയ്യുന്നില്ല. അവർ പറയുന്നത് നോമിനൽ ഇനേഷ്യ ഇൻ ദ ഫോം ഓഫ് ലോങ് ടേം വേജ് കോൺട്രാക്ട്സ്, ലോങ് ടേം ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു വേജ് കോൺട്രാക്ട്സ് ആണ് അവരുടെ പോളിസി എന്നതാണ്. So in developed economies, wages are not determined in spot markets but tend to be set for an agreed period in the form of an explicit or implicit contract. അതായത് പ്രത്യക്ഷ തൊഴിൽ കരാറുകളിലെയും പരോക്ഷ തൊഴിൽ കരാറുകളിലൂടെയും, അതായത് എക്സ്പ്ലിസിറ്റ് ലേബർ കോൺട്രാക്റ്റിലൂടെയും ഇംപ്ലിസിറ്റ് ലേബർ കോൺട്രാക്റ്റിലൂടെയുമാണ് അവർ സ്പോട്ട് മാർക്കറ്റിൽ അവരുടെ വേജസ് ഡിറ്റർമൈൻ ചെയ്യുന്നത്. The existence of these long-term contracts can generate sufficient nominal wage rigidity for monetary policy to regain its effectiveness. സഫിഷ്യൻ്റ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു വേജ് റിജിഡിറ്റിയാണ് അവർ പോളിസി ഒരു ലോങ് ടേം കോൺട്രാക്റ്റിലൂടെ ഫോളോ ചെയ്യുന്നത്. ഇറ്റ് ഷുഡ് ബി നോട്ടഡ് ഹവർ ദാറ്റ് നെയ്തർ ഫിഷർ നോർ ഫെൽപ്സ് ആൻഡ് ടൈലർ പ്രിറ്റൻഡഡ് ടു ഹാവ് എ റിഗറസ് മൈക്രോ ഫൗണ്ടേഷൻ ഓഫ് for their price wage setting assumptions. Instead, they take it for granted there is a revealed preference for long-term wage contracts reflecting and perceived disadvantages that accompany too frequent adjustment to wages and prices. According to Phelps, in 1985 and 1990, there are private advantages to both firms and workers from entering into long-term wage contracts. അതായത് ഒരു ലോങ് ടേം വേജ് കോൺട്രാക്ട്സ് പ്രൈസ് റിജിഡിറ്റിക്ക് ഒക്കെയാണ് ഫോക്കസ് കൊടുക്കുന്നത്. അതുകൊണ്ട് തന്നെ ഫേംസിനും വർക്കേഴ്സിനും ഒരുപാട് അഡ്വാൻറ്റേജസ് ഇതിൻ്റെ ഭാഗമായിട്ടുണ്ട്. Then sources of real price rigidity. The first source, mild sensitivity of marginal cost to variations in output and pro-cyclical elasticity of demand, will continue towards real price rigidity. And the second source, thick market externalities. When markets are thick during the periods of high economic activity, it seems plausible that surge cost will be lower than is the case in thin market characterized by a low level of trading activity. Then customer markets. The crucial characteristics of customer market is low frequency of surge relative to the frequency of purchase. Then price rigidity and the input-output table. Once decentralization and multiplicity of supplier-producer relationship are recognized, no single firm can perform an action that would eliminate the aggregate business cycle. Then capital market imperfections. An important obstacle to firms seeking external finance is the problem of asymmetric information between borrowers and lenders. That is, borrowers are much better informed about the viability and quality of their investment projects than lenders. And finally, judging quality by price. Stiglitz has emphasized another reason why firms may be reluctant to reduce price when faced with the decline in demand. In markets where customers have imperfect information about the characteristics of the product which they wish to buy, the price may be used by the quality signal. So by borrowing price, a firm runs the risk that its customers may interpret this action as the signal indicating a deterioration of quality. Next, real wage rigidity. New Keynesian explanations of real wage rigidity fall into three main groups. First one, implicit contract theories, efficiency wage theories, and insider-outsider theories. And the first of all, implicit contract models. The original implicit non-union contract models were provided by Bailey in 1974, D.F. Gordon in 1974, and Azariadis in 1975. Implicit contract theory seeks to understand what it is that forms the economic glue that keeps workers and firms together in long-term relationships, since such arrangements, rather than the Walrasian actionnaire, dominate the labor market, which means the firm seeks to maintain the loyalty of their workforce. They find it necessary to enter into unwritten implicit undertakings with their workers. This invisible handshake provides each worker with assurance concerning the terms of the working relationship under a variety of working circumstances. So these models of Bailey, Gordon, and Azariadis examine the consequences of optimum labor contracts established between risk-neutral firms and risk-averse workers. So in these circumstances, the wage rate not only represents the payment for labor services, but also serves as an insurance against the risk of variable income in the face of shocks. A constant real wage smooths the individual worker consumption stream, and firms provide this insurance since they are in a better position than workers to weather economic fluctuations given their better access to capital and insurance markets. Because firms provide stable wages over time. Workers, for their part, accept a real wage, which is lower on average than the highly varying rates that would be dictated by market forces. Then implicit contract theories of wage rigidity. So in this case, the workers are risk averse and have limited access to capital markets. They prefer insurance against fluctuations in their income. Then cannot obtain wages from insurance companies and the shortcomings of the theory. And then firms offer wage and employment in insurance as part of employment package. And finally, those firms can attract workers at lower wages than firms which do not offer job insurance. Then efficiency wage model. Any acceptable account of involuntary unemployment must explain why unemployed workers are unable to bid down wages to a level that will generate full employment. Efficiency wage theory suggests that it is not in a firm's interest to lower real wages because the productivity of workers is not independent of wages rather than real wages, and workers' effort are independent at least over some meaningful range. Efficiency wage theory described by Gordon in 1990 as the range of 80s is surveyed by Yellen in 1984, Akloff and Yellen in 1986, Cards in 1986-1988, Hale in 1990, and Weiss in 1991. See also Akloff in 1979-2002 and Stiglitz in 2002. And here we can going to discuss what is efficiency wages. Another important part of new Keynesian economics has been the development of new theories of unemployment. Persistent unemployment is a puzzle for economic theory. Normally, economists perceive that an excess supply of labor would exert a downward pressure on wages. A reduction in wages would in turn reduce unemployment by raising the quality of labor demanded. Hence, according to standard economic theory, unemployment is a self-correcting problem. The reasons for efficiency wage theory. So in this theory, higher wages could cause increased labor productivity, that is MRP. In this case, the wage increases can pay for themselves. The first reason, fear of losing jobs. The argument is that if workers are paid a higher wage, they have more to lose from being made redundant. Therefore, if they have a job with a wage significantly higher than benefits or alternative jobs, they will have greater motivation to impress their boss and keep it. Then the second point, loyalty. Secondly, if workers receive a higher pay, they may just feel more loyalty towards the company and be willing to work harder and with more determination. Then labor market. Labor market has a gift exchange where goods labor relations depend on goodwill. Then lower cost of supervision. Workers receiving higher wages were more motivated and therefore needed less managerial supervision. Then attract higher quality labor. If a firm pays above the market clear level, it will attract a better quality worker who will feel they can get a relatively better paid job. And finally, nutritional theories. In developing economies at very low rates of pay, increasing wages can enable a reduction in absolute poverty, better health, and nutrition lead to better quality labor. Then, modern efficiency wage theories. The modern efficiency wage theories, which have been put forward, relate in general to the issues of the selection and incentives and four categories of efficiency wage theory. And it can be identified as first one, the adverse selection model, and the second one, the labor turnover model, and third one, the shrinking model, and the fourth one, the fairness model. First one, the adverse selection model. So in the adverse selection model, firms that offer higher wages will attract the best workers. അതായത് നല്ല കാലിബറുള്ള ബെസ്റ്റ് വർക്കേഴ്സിനെ അട്രാക്ട് ചെയ്യാൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് ഫേംസ് ഹയർ വേജസ് ഓഫർ ചെയ്യുന്നു ബിക്കോസ് ദ ലേബർ മാർക്കറ്റ് ഈസ് പോപ്പുലേറ്റഡ് ബൈ ഹെട്രോജീനിയസ് ഇൻഡിവിജ്വൽസ്. Firms have imperfect information about the productivity characteristics of job applicants. The labor market is an excellent example of the market where asymmetric information predominates. When there is asymmetric information, one party to a transaction has more information than the other party. So in this case, workers have more information about their own abilities, honesty, and commitment than employers before they are hired and will attempt to send signals to potential employers that convey information about their qualities such as educational qualifications, previous employment record, and current wage if employed. Because of the trivial hiring and firing cost, firms prefer not to hire workers and then find any need to fire those with low productivity. And the second, the labor turnover model. The labor turnover model, a second reason why firms may offer an efficiency wage in excess of the market clearing wage is to reduce costly labor turnover. This approach received inspiration from the pioneering work of Phelps in 1968, Phelps et al. In 1970 in the development of explanations of the natural rate of unemployment and such behavior. The idea here is that the workers willing to quit a job will be significantly required if a firm pays above the going rate. So in the model developed by Salop in 1979, labor market equilibrium entails involuntary unemployment. Since all firms need to raise their wages to deter workers from quitting. അതായത് ലേബർ മാർക്കറ്റിൽ വേജ് കൂട്ടുന്നു. അതായത് ഫേംസ് നീഡഡ് ടു റൈസ് ദെയർ വേജസ് ടു ഡിറ്റർ വർക്കേഴ്സ് ഫ്രം കിറ്റിംഗ്. അതായത് ജോലിയിൽ നിന്ന് വർക്കേഴ്സ് കിറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നത് ഒഴിവാക്കാൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് അവർക്ക് കൂടുതലായിട്ട് വേജ് കൂട്ടി കൊടുക്കുന്നു. സോ ഇൻ സിറ്റുവേഷൻസ് വെർ അൺഎംപ്ലോയ്മെൻറ്റ് ഇൻക്രീസസ്, അങ്ങനെ വേജ് കൂട്ടുന്നതിൻ്റെ ഭാഗമായിട്ട് അൺഎംപ്ലോയ്മെൻറ്റ് കൂടുകയും ദ വേജ് പ്രീമിയം നെസസറി ടു ഡിറ്റർ ലേബർ ടേൺ ഓവർ ഫിൽ ഫോർ എംപ്ലോയ്മെൻറ്റ് കുറയുകയും ചെയ്യുന്നു. Then the shrinking model. In most occupations, labor contracts are incomplete, which allows workers to exercise discretion with respect to their effort levels. Because contract cannot specify every aspect of a worker's performance and duties, there is effort discretion. Since the collection of information relating to the productivity of individual workers and the continual monitoring of workers is very costly to the firm, the payment of an efficiency wage in excess of the market clearing equilibrium wage can act as an incentive which will deter the working from shirking. And the last one, the fairness model. Several economists have examined the adverse effects of the unfair wages and wage cuts on worker effort via the impact such cuts will have on the morale of the workforce. Sociological models stress such factors as the importance of wage relativities, status, relative deprivation, loyalty, trust, and equity. In a series of papers, Aklofaniel and Solo, a piece of homemade sociology and developed models where feelings about equity and fairness acts as a deterrent to firms to offer too low wages in the labor market. Then insider-outsider models. Why don't unemployed workers offer to work for lower wages than those currently paid to employers' workers? If they did so, wages would be bit down and employment would increase. എന്തുകൊണ്ടാണ് അൺഎംപ്ലോയ്ഡ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള വർക്കേഴ്സ് ഓഫർ ടു വർക്ക് ഫോർ ലോവർ വേജസ്, വളരെ കുറഞ്ഞ വേതനത്തിന് അവർ ജോലി ചെയ്യാൻ തയ്യാറാവുന്നത്, ദാൻ ദോസ് കറൻ്റ്ലി പെയ്ഡ് ടു എംപ്ലോയേഴ്സ് വർക്കേഴ്സ്? കറൻ്റ്ലി എംപ്ലോയ്ഡ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള വർക്കേഴ്സിനേക്കാളും കുറവ് വേതനത്തിൽ അൺഎംപ്ലോയ്ഡ് വർക്കേഴ്സ് എന്തുകൊണ്ട് ജോലി ചെയ്യാൻ തയ്യാറാവുന്നു? ഇഫ് ദേ ഡിഡ് സോ, വേജസ് ഷുഡ് ബി ഡൗൺ ആൻഡ് എംപ്ലോയ്മെൻറ്റ് വുഡ് ഇൻക്രീസ്. അതിലൂടെ എംപ്ലോയ്മെൻറ്റ് വർദ്ധിക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. There appears to be an unwritten 11th commandment through shalt not permit job theft by unbidding and stealing the jobs of their comrades. The inside-outsider theory also attempts to explain why wage rigidity persists in the face of involuntary unemployment. The inside-outsider model approach to real wage rigidity was developed during the insider-outsider model. The insider-outsider theory is a new Keynesian economic model which was developed in the year 1980s, explaining certain disparities in the job market. ഇൻസൈഡർ ഔട്ട്സൈഡർ തിയറി എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ന്യൂ കെനീഷ്യൻ എക്കണോമിക് മോഡലാണ്. 1980 ഡെവലപ്പ് ചെയ്തത്. മെയിനായിട്ട് ഇതിൽ ഡിസ്കസ് ചെയ്യുന്നത് ജോബ് മാർക്കറ്റിലെ ഡിസ്പാരിറ്റീസിനെ കുറിച്ചാണ്. ഇൻസൈഡേഴ്സ് ആർ ദോസ് ഹു ഓൾറെഡി ഹാവ് എ ജോബ് ഇൻ എ കമ്പനി, മോസ്റ്റ് ഓഫ് ദ ടൈം എ പെർമനൻറ്റ് കോൺട്രാക്ട് ആൻഡ് ഹാവിംഗ് അണ്ടർഗോൺ എക്സ്പെൻസീവ് ട്രെയിനിങ്. Meanwhile, outsiders are those with unstable jobs or unemployed. അതായത് ഒരു കമ്പനിയുടെ സെക്യൂരിറ്റീസിൽ കമ്പനിയുടെ റിലേറ്റഡ് പാർട്ടീസ് ട്രേഡിംഗ് നടത്തുകയാണ്. ഇൻസൈഡർ എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് കമ്പനി റിലേറ്റഡ് പേഴ്സൺസ് ലൈക്ക് ഡയറക്ടേഴ്സ്, എംപ്ലോയീസ് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ കമ്പനിയുടെ മെറ്റീരിയൽ ഇൻഫോർമേഷനിൽ ആക്സസ് ഉള്ള ആളുകളെയാണ് ഇൻസൈഡേഴ്സ് എന്നതുകൊണ്ട് ഉദ്ദേശിക്കുന്നത്. On the other hand, the resources need to replace insiders can quickly add up. Think of severance packages, hiring processes, and training, for example. So these labor turnover costs often end up being more expensive than the money saved by paying a lower salary. So it's not really in a company's best interest to fire its insiders, but outsiders are those who want job. Outsiders are those with unstable jobs or unemployed persons, but they do not get job. The recession caused the insiders to become outsiders. അതായത് these labor's turnover cost often ends up being expensive than the money saved by paying by a lower salary. So it's not really a company's best interest to fire its insiders. So recession ആണ് ഇൻസൈഡേഴ്സിനെ become outsiders ആക്കി മാറ്റുന്നത്. Then limitations of efficiency wage theory. We know in practice many factors determine worker morale and productivity. Wages are just one of them. So often other factors are more important, such as work condition, management, etc. If non-wage work factors are negative, then higher wages may be insufficient to boost productivity. So it depends on the reaction of other firms. If other firms also start paying above market clearing levels, then the gain from attracting the best quality workers will be lost. Firms with monopoly power may not need to pay higher wages to create the threat of workers losing their jobs. These are the major limitations of efficiency wage theory. Next, we are going to discuss New Keynesian business cycle theory. New Keynesian economists assert that the source of shocks which generate aggregate disturbances can arise from the supply side or the demand side. However, New Keynesians argue that there are frictions and imperfections within the economy which will amplify these shocks so that large fluctuations in real output and employment result. The important issue for New Keynesians is not so much the source of the shocks, but how the economy responds to them. Within New Keynesian economies, there have been two standards of research relating to the issue of aggregate fluctuations. First one, the predominant approach was to emphasize the importance of nominal rigidities. The second approach follows Keynes 1936, Tobin in 1975, and explores the potentially destabilizing the impact of wage and price flexibility. Consider the above figure. In panel A, we illustrate the impact of a decline in the money supply which shifts aggregate demand from AD0 to AD1. If a combination of many causes and real rigidities makes the price level rigid at P0, the decline in aggregate demand will move to the economy from point E0 to point E1 in panel A. The decline in output reduces effective demand for labor. In panel C, the effective demand for labor curve DLE shows how much labor is necessary to produce different levels of output. As the diagram shows, L1, the amount of labor is required to produce Y1 amount of output. which prices and the real wage fixed at P0 and W0 respectively, firms move off the notional demand curve for labor DL, operating instead along their effective labor demand curve indicated by NKL1 in panel D. At the rigid wage of W0, firms would like to hire L0 workers, but they have no market for the extra output which would be produced by hiring the extra workers. The aggregate demand shock has produced in an increase in involuntary unemployment of L0, L1. The new Keynesian short-term aggregate supply curve SRAS, that is P0, is perfectly elastic at the fixed price level. Eventually, downward pressure on prices and wages would move the economy from point E1 to E2 in panel A. But this process may take an unacceptably long period of time. Therefore, new Keynesian economies like Keynes advocate measures which will push the aggregate demand curve back towards E0. In the new Keynesian model, monetary shocks clearly have non-neutral effects in the short run, although money remains neutral in the long run, as indicated by the vertical long-run aggregate supply curve LRAS. New Keynesian business cycle theory. The new classical macroeconomics offers a strong criticism of orthodox Keynesian macroeconomics on the ground that Keynesian macroeconomic models are primarily ad hoc in the sense that they are not based on economic agents optimization program. In other words, orthodox Keynesian economics does not have explicit micro foundation. Moreover, rigidity in nominal variables including wage and price is merely assumed without any rigorous analytical foundation. So this is precisely the challenge that new Keynesian macroeconomics respond to, be offering specific micro details of incomplete nominal adjustment. The new Keynesian theories offer different explanation for wage price thickness. These theories include, among efficiency wage theory, small menu cost, and aggregate demand externality, and staggered price adjustment. So in most Keynesians do not accept real business cycle theory. They believe that short-term fluctuations in output and employment represent deviations from the economy's natural rate of unemployment. That is the rate at which consistent with absolute price level stability. So there may be deviations from the natural rate to occur due to the fact that wages and price are slow to adjust to changing macroeconomic environment. This inflexibility, that is stickiness, makes the short-run aggregate supply curve upward sloping rather than vertical. Consequently, the economy experiences short-run output and employment fluctuations. Therefore, in Keynesian models, unemployment is caused by due to rigidity of money wage, caused by fixed wage labor contracts, and workers' backward looking price expectations. When aggregate commodity demand falls, the demand for labor also falls. But due to money wage rigidity, it is not possible to maintain the initial employment level in the short run. Here we are going to discuss there are three causes of rigidities of price and wage. The first cause, product market imperfection, that is existence of monopolistic competition and oligopoly. And the second cause, product price rigidity. And the third cause, real rigidities, the factors that make the real wage or firm's relative price rigid in the face of changes in aggregate demand. On the basis of these assumptions, three types of new Keynesian models have been developed, like sticky price or menu cost models, and the second one efficiency wage models, and the third one insider-outsider models. According to Ng Mankiw, prices are sticky for two different but interrelated reasons. First one menu cost, and the second one aggregate demand externality. Then menu cost. Menu costs are cost of price adjustment, such as new prices, menus are to be printed in catalogs and announced through trade journals, magazines, and television programs and so on. Because of menu cost, firms adjust prices at periodic intervals rather than every now and then. Due to discrete rather than continuous prices, price adjustment fails to occur instantaneously, as Leon Wilders has postulated in his general equilibrium analysis. Whether menu cost can explain the short-term price thickness is debatable. Such costs may be small for the individual firm, but they can have widespread ramifications or large effects on the whole economy. Then aggregate supply demand externality. According to the supporters of the menu cost hypothesis, prices adjust slowly, because there are externalities to price adjustment. Price cut by a single firm is beneficial to various other firms in the economy. The lowering of price by a firm implies marginally lowering the average price level. So, a fall in the price level increases what Don Pantinkin calls real money balances. This by shifting the LM curve to the right and increases GDP. An economy gradually moves to the expansionary phase of the business cycle. The demand for the products of all firms increases automatically. This is known as aggregate demand externality. That is the microeconomic effect of one firm's price adjustment on the demand for all other firms' products. In the presence of this aggregate demand externality, small many cost can make prices sticky, which in its turn can impose huge cost on society. When a firm plans to cut its present price, which is considered to be high, it takes into consideration both the cost and benefit of price adjustments. Then, relation between inflation and unemployment. The traditional economist since the time of classicist David Hume in 1752 emphasizes that supply of money influences both inflation and employment. The same argument even motivated modern theorists like Milton Friedman and Robert Lucas. But business cycle theorists like Prescott laid emphasis on technological advancement and argued that money has no role in production and employment fluctuations. But this theory did not get much support. There is a wide agreement about monetary fluctuations push inflation and unemployment in opposite direction. That is, economy faces trade-off between inflation and unemployment. As per David Hume and others, monetary policy has a big say in trade-off between inflation and unemployment. But still, the problem of trade-off between these two in the opposite direction is not explained. From this, many blamed on imperfect information, long-term labor contracts, cost of price adjustment, etc. are leading to into theoretical and empirical questions. The trade-off is written as follows: II is equal to K minus AU, where II is the inflation, U is the unemployment, K and A is equal to parameters which are greater than 0. So this relationship only indicates that II and U are negatively related. This trade-off inflation and unemployment is shown by the Phillips curve. Phillips curve. A.W.H. Phillips' study of wage inflation and unemployment in the United Kingdom from 1861 to 1957 is a milestone in the development of macroeconomics. മൈക്രോഎക്കണോമിക്സിലെ ഒരു മൈൽ സ്റ്റോൺ വർക്ക് എന്ന് വേണമെങ്കിൽ നമുക്ക് A.W. ഫിലിപ്സിൻ്റെ വർക്കിനെ പറയാം. അതായത് അദ്ദേഹം ആർഗ്യൂ ചെയ്യുന്നത് ദർ ഇസ് എ ട്രേഡ് ഓഫ് ബിറ്റ്വീൻ ഇൻഫ്ലേഷൻ ആൻഡ് അൺഎംപ്ലോയ്മെൻറ്റ്. അൺഎംപ്ലോയ്മെൻറ്റും ഇൻഫ്ലേഷനും തമ്മിൽ ഒരു ട്രേഡ് ഓഫ് ഉണ്ട്. അതായത് റേറ്റ് ഓഫ് ഗ്രോത്ത് ഓഫ് മണി വേജസ് ലിങ്ക് ടു ഇൻഫ്ലേഷണറി പ്രഷർ. In 1958, he was the professor A.W. Phillips. He argued that there is a statistical relation between the rate of growth of money wages and unemployment from the period in 1861 to 1957. His theory has led to there is a trade-off between inflation and unemployment. So this is the curve. The x-axis measures the unemployment rate and the y-axis shows on inflation rate. There is an inverse relationship between unemployment and inflation is depicted as downward sloping concave curve with inflation on the y-axis and unemployment on x-axis. So increasing inflation decreases unemployment. That is, inflation increases point A to B, 2% to 5%, but unemployment decreases 6% to 3%. Alternatively, a focus on decreasing unemployment also increases inflation and vice versa. So expectations augmented Phillips curve. The expectation augmented Phillips curve introduces adaptive expectations into Phillips curve and first used to explain monetarist view of the Phillips curve. Then this is the initially unemployment and inflation are at point A. The government decides to embark on the expansionist monetarist policy which floods the markets with the inexpensive credit incentivizing consumption. Expectation shift to point B. Along the Phillips curve, unemployment is reduced through economic stimulus with the trade-off in the form of inflation. However, after a short period, agents will begin to associate expansionist policies with inflation, which means a drain on their resources and they will push for higher wages. This will stop the consumption stimulus and also de-investing incentivize hiring. Eventually, agents will shift their expectations curve into point C. That is why in the long run fluctuations or inflation has little effect on unemployment. Next, new Keynesian interpretation. The new Keynesians explain the breakdown of the simple Phillips curve in terms of the non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment, that is NAIRU. NAIRU, which exists at the long run Phillips curve, is the rate of unemployment at which inflation stabilizes. In other words, at this rate of unemployment, prices will rise at the same rate each year. അതായത് ന്യൂ കെനീഷ്യൻസ് എക്സ്പ്ലെയിൻ ചെയ്യുന്നത് സിമ്പിൾ ഫിലിപ്സ് കർവിൻ്റെ ബ്രേക്ക് ഡൗണിന് ശേഷം ഒരു ന്യൂ വേർഷൻ കൊണ്ടുവരികയാണ് നോൺ അസിലേറ്റിംഗ് ഇൻഫ്ലേഷൻ റേറ്റ് ഓഫ് അൺഎംപ്ലോയ്മെൻറ്റ് ദാറ്റ് ഈസ് നായിരു. സോ ഇൻ ദിസ് കേസ് ഇറ്റ് ഈസ് ഓൾസോ എക്സിസ്റ്റ് ഇൻ ദ ലോങ് റൺ ഫിലിപ്സ് കർവ്. ഇറ്റ് ഈസ് ദ റേറ്റ് ഓഫ് അൺഎംപ്ലോയ്മെൻറ്റ് അറ്റ് വിച്ച് ഇൻഫ്ലേഷൻ വിൽ സ്റ്റെബിലൈസ്. ഒരു പർട്ടിക്കുലർ പോയിന്റിൽ ഇൻഫ്ലേഷൻ സ്റ്റെബിലൈസ് ചെയ്യുന്നു. ഇൻ അതർ വേർഡ്സ് ദിസ് റേറ്റ് ഓഫ് അൺഎംപ്ലോയ്മെൻറ്റ് പ്രൈസസ് വിൽ റൈസ് അറ്റ് ദ സെയിം റേറ്റ് ഈച്ച് ഇയർ. NAIRU is an acronym for Non-Accelerating Inflation Rate of Unemployment and refers to a theoretical level of unemployment below which inflation would be expected to rise. In other words, it is a specific level of unemployment which does not cause inflation. If unemployment is at NAIRU level, inflation is constant. That is, the NAIRU was first introduced in 1975 as the non-inflationary rate of unemployment by Franco Modigliani and Lucas Papadimos. It was an improvement in the concept of natural rate of unemployment by Milton Friedman. Then long run Phillips curve. To keep unemployment below the natural rate, inflation must keep on increasing every year. In the long run Phillips curve will be vertical at the rate of unemployment where real aggregate demand equals real aggregate supply. This is called the natural rate of unemployment. It is also called NAIRU or lowest sustainable unemployment rate. The non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment NAIRU, also referred to as long-run Phillips curve, and it is the specific level of unemployment that is evident in an economy that does not cause inflation to rise up. So NAIRU often represents equilibrium between the state of the economy and the labor market. So this is the figure. In the figure, x-axis measures the unemployment rate and y-axis inflation rate. The short-run Phillips curve before and after expansionary policy with the long-run Phillips curve NAIRU. So in this diagram, the long-run Phillips curve is vertical red line. The NAIRU theory says that when unemployment is at the rate defined by this line, inflation will be stable. However, in the short run, policy makers will face an inflation unemployment rate trade-off marked by the initial short-run Phillips curve in the graph. Then policy makers can therefore reduce the unemployment rate temporarily, moving from A to point B through expansionary policy. However, according to the NAIRU, exploiting this short-run trade-off will raise inflation expectations, shifting the short-run curve rightward, അതായത് ന്യൂ ഷോർട്ട് റൺ ഫിലിപ്സ് കർവ് and moving the point of equilibrium B to C. Thus, the reduction in unemployment below the natural rate will be temporary and lead only to higher inflation in the long run. In this table, we can clearly understood that the unemployment in UK in the period of recession and after. So in the recession or deflation period, we can compare two time periods, that is in 1980 to 81, or recovery or inflation time we can take two periods, that is in 1985 to 86. During in 1980 to 81, the UK entered a recession with falling output, falling inflation rate and rising unemployment. In the year 1981, unemployment increased from 1.5 million to 2 million. After in 1981, UK started to recover from the recession, but unemployment remains the same, that is 2 million, even after 4 years, that is in 1985. And in the year in 1986, the unemployment increased to 3 million. Then policy implications. If there is no hysteresis in unemployment, then for example, if the central bank wishes to lower the inflation rate, it may shift to a contractionary monetary policy, which, if not fully anticipated and believed, will temporarily increase the unemployment rate. If the contractionary policy persists, the unemployment rise will eventually disappear as the unemployment rate returns to the natural rate. Then, the cost of anti-inflation policy will have been temporarily unemployment. But if there is hysteresis, the unemployment rise initiated by the contractionary policy will never completely go away. And in this case, the cost of anti-inflation policy will have been permanently higher unemployment, making the policy less likely to have greater benefits than cost. So it is important to note that hysteresis is more serious than that of unemployment relates to business cycle. It cannot be overlooked by simple expansionary monetary fiscal policies, but policies including that of job training and counseling is necessary. Hysteresis and Nairo. Hysteresis and Nairo are the two terms taken from the subject physics and used to show the relationship between inflation and unemployment. Nairo is a specific level of unemployment that does not cause inflation. If unemployment is at Nairo level, inflation is constant. Hysteresis refers to an event in the economy that the unemployment persists even after the removal of recession. So that can be delayed effect, as sometimes the rate of unemployment continue to rise even after the commencement of recovery. To indicate the permanent change in the attitude and skill of workforce even after the commencement recovery. Hysteresis is the term which was used to explain the process in the expectation augmented Phillips curve. Then, empirical evidence, hysteresis and the Nairo. Since the early 1970s, the natural rate of unemployment seems to have taken a wild ride in OECD countries. For OECD countries in general, unemployment in the 1980s and 90s was higher than during the golden age of the 1950 and 1973 period. The steady rising unemployment rates appear to have their origins in the two OPEC oil price shocks in 1973 and in 1979 respectively, and in the case of European OECD countries, unemployment that averaged 1.7% in the early 1960s rose to 11% by the mid 1990s. So, this high average also hides the large dispersion of unemployment rates across the European countries. Estimates show that the US natural rate of unemployment has also varied during this same period, although the long-run unemployment repercussions of the 1980s recessions appear to have been much more persistent in Europe than in the USA. While the problem of inflation was a major policy concern during the 1970s and the early 1980s, by the mid 1980s, the economies were once again turning their attention to the problem of unemployment, in particular, the rise in the estimated Nairo. Then, what is hysteresis? Hysteresis in the field of economics refers to an event in the economy that persists into the future even after the factors that led to that event have been removed. Hysteresis can occur following a recession when the unemployment rate continues to increase despite growth in the economy. So the term coined by Sir James Alfred Ewing, a Scottish physicist and engineer in 1855 to 1935, to refer to systems, organisms, that fields that have memory. In other words, the consequences of an input are experienced with a certain time lag or delay. Hysteresis is derived from the Greek term meaning a coming short, a deficiency. Hysteresis in economics arises when a single disturbance affects the course of the economy. One example is seen with iron. Iron maintains some magnetization after it has been exposed to and removed from the magnetic field. An example of hysteresis is the delayed effect of unemployment, whereby the unemployment rate can continue to rise even after the economy has begun recovering. The current unemployment rate is a percentage of the number of people in an economy who are looking for work but can't find any. Then, in order to understand hysteresis, we must first explore the types of unemployment. In a recession, which is 2 consecutive quarters of contracting growth, unemployment arises, especially cyclical unemployment, natural unemployment, and structural unemployment. First of all, cyclical unemployment. When a recession occurs, cyclical unemployment rises as the economy experiences negative growth rates. അതായത് സൈക്ലിക്കൽ എക്കോണമിയിൽ സൈക്ലിക്കൽ ഫ്ലക്ച്വേഷൻസിൻ്റെ ഭാഗമായിട്ടുണ്ടാകുന്ന അൺഎംപ്ലോയ്മെൻ്റ് ആണ് സൈക്ലിക്കൽ അൺഎംപ്ലോയ്മെൻറ്റ്. എസ്പെഷ്യലി ഇൻ റിസഷൻ ടൈംസിൽ cyclical unemployment rises when the economy performs poorly and falls when the economy is in expansion. Then natural unemployment. നാച്ചുറൽ അൺഎംപ്ലോയ്മെൻറ്റ് എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ നാച്ചുറലി ഒക്കറിങ് അൺഎംപ്ലോയ്മെൻ്റ് ആണ്. എസ്പെഷ്യലി കോളേജ് ഗ്രാജുവേറ്റ്സിൻ്റെ ഇടയിലും ടെക്നോളജിക്കൽ അഡ്വാൻസസിൻ്റെ ഭാഗമായിട്ടുണ്ടാകുന്ന അൺഎംപ്ലോയ്മെൻറ്റ്. അതായത് നാച്ചുറൽ അൺഎംപ്ലോയ്മെൻറ്റ് ഈസ് നോട്ട് ദി റിസൾട്ട് ഓഫ് റിസഷൻ but instead the result of a natural flow of workers to and from jobs. Natural unemployment explains why unemployed people exist in a growing expansionary economy, also called natural rate of unemployment. It represents people including college graduates or those laid off because of technological advances. And the structural unemployment, when workers are laid off due to a factory relocating or technology replaces their job. Structural unemployment exists. Structural unemployment, which is a portion of natural unemployment, occurs even when an economy is healthy and expanding. It can be due to changing business environment or economic landscape and last for many years. Structural unemployment is typically due to business changes such as factories moving overseas, technological changes, and lack of skills for new jobs. Module 4, the new political macroeconomics. In this module, we will examine some of the progress that has been made with regard to the development of the new political macroeconomics. These are, first one, political distortions and macroeconomic performance, then political influences on policy choice, role of government, politicians and stabilization policy, then alternative approach to the political business cycle, the North's opportunistic model, the Hibbs partisan model, the decline and renaissance of opportunistic and partisan model, rational political business cycles, policy implications of politico-economic model, an independent central bank, the political economy of debt and deficits, political and economic instability. Next, we are going to discuss political distortions and macroeconomic performance. We know the relationship between the economy and the political system has always attracted the interest of economists, since it is obvious that politics will influence the choice of economic policies and consequently economic performance. During the last quarter of the 20th century, research into the various forms of interaction between politics and macroeconomics has become a major growth area, giving rise to a field known as the new political macroeconomics, a research area which has developed at the interface of macroeconomics, social choice theory, and game theory. Of particular interest of macroeconomics is the influence that the interaction of political and economic factors has on such issues as business cycle, inflation, unemployment, the conduct and implementation of stabilization policies, the relationship between dictatorship, democracy, inequality, and economic growth, instability and conflict, the origin of persistent budget deficits, international integration, and size of the nations. So the major contributions to this field of activity, both in terms of theoretical analysis and empirical investigation, have come from the research economists such as Daron Acemoglu, Alberto Alesina, Alan Dranzen, Bruno Frey, Douglas Hibbs, William Northas, Douglas North, Manco Olson, Kenneth Rogoff, Friedrich Schneider, and Andre Schleifer. So political influence on policy choice. Keynes in 1926 believed that capitalism can probably be made more efficient for attaining economic ends than any alternative yet in sight. However, for that to be the case would necessarily involve the extension of government intervention in the economy. So the classical economists did not deny that fluctuations in aggregate economic activity could occur, but they firmly believed that the self-correcting forces of the price mechanism would prevail and restore the system to full employment within all acceptable time periods. By the mid-1920s, Keynes was already expressing his disillusionment with this classical laissez-faire philosophy, which presented a vision of capitalist market economies where order and stability were the norm. For Keynes, the wise management of capitalism was defended as the only practicable means of avoiding the destruction of existing economic forms in their entity. Hence, the orthodox Keynesian view evolved out of the catastrophic experience of Great Depression and suggested that market economies are inherently unstable. So, such instability generates welfare reducing fluctuations in aggregate output and employment. As a result, old Keynesians argue that this instability can and should be corrected by discretionary monetary and fiscal policies. Next, in particular, the work of public choice economists has called into the question the assumption that elected politicians will always pursue policies aimed at maximizing net social welfare. സി ബുചാനൻ ഇറ്റാൽ ഇൻ 1978. അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ വർക്കിൽ അദ്ദേഹം പറയുന്നുണ്ട് ഇലക്റ്റഡ് പൊളിറ്റീഷ്യൻസ് എല്ലായ്പ്പോഴും എയിം ചെയ്യുന്നത് ഒരു മാക്സിമൈസേഷൻ ഓഫ് സോഷ്യൽ ബെനഫിറ്റ് ആണ്. ഡ്യൂറിംഗ് ദ ഏർലി ഡേയ്സ് ഓഫ് ദ കെനീഷ്യൻ റവല്യൂഷൻ, ജോസഫ് ഷൂംപീറ്റർ ഓൾസോ റെക്കഗ്നൈസ്ഡ് ദാറ്റ് സിൻസ് capitalist democracies are inhabited by politicians who compete for votes, this will inevitably influence policy decisions and outcomes. See Schumpeter in 1939 and in 1942. For example, from a public choice perspective, Keynesian economics is seen to have fundamentally weakened the fiscal constitutions of the industrial democracies by giving respectability to the idea that budget deficit should be accepted as a method of reducing the risk of recessions. Buchanan et al. In 1978 argued that such a philosophy operating within a democratic system where politicians are constantly in search of electoral behavior inevitably leads to an asymmetry in the application of Keynesian policies. Because voters do not understand that government faces an intertemporal budget constraint, they underestimate the future tax liabilities of debt-financed expenditure programs, that is, voters suffer from fiscal illusion. See Alensina and Perotti in 1995. Instead of balancing the budget over the circle as Keynesian intended in accordance with the Abba Lerner's in 1944 principle of functional finance, stabilization policies become asymmetric as the manipulation of the economy for electoral purposes generates a persistent bias towards deficit. A deficit bias can also result from strategic behavior whereby a current government attempts to influence the policies of future governments by manipulating the debt. Given these considerations, it would seem that macroeconomists ought to consider the possibility that elected politicians may engage in economic manipulation for political profit by Wagner in 1977. So, in the neoclassical political economy literature, government is no longer viewed as exogenous. Rather, it is partially endogenous and policies will reflect the various interests in the society. This is certainly not a new insight as it evident from the following comment taken from Alexis de Tocqueville's famous discussion on democracy in America in 1835. Therefore, it is impossible to consider the ordinary course of affairs in the United States without perceiving that the desire to be re-elected is the chief aim of the president, and that especially the election approaches, his personal interest takes the place of his interest in the public good. Although Keynes had an extremely low opinion of most politicians in the context of his era, it never really crossed his mind to view the political process as a marketplace for voters. കെയ്ൻസിൻ്റെ അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ അഭിപ്രായത്തിൽ അദ്ദേഹം പറയുന്നത് അതായത് പൊളിറ്റിക്കൽ പ്രോസസ്സ് ആസ് എ മാർക്കറ്റ് പ്ലേസ് ഫോർ വോട്ടേഴ്സ്, പൊളിറ്റിക്കൽ പ്രോസസ്സ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് വോട്ട് നേടാൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു പ്ലേസ് മാത്രമാണെന്നാണ് അദ്ദേഹം പറയുന്നത്. വാട്ട് കെയ്ൻസ് ഹാഡ് ഇൻ മൈൻഡ് വാസ് വാട്ട് ക്യാൻ ബി ഡിസ്ക്രൈബ്ഡ് ആസ് എ ലീനിയർ മോഡൽ ഓഫ് ദി policy making process whereby the role of the economist is to offer advice, predictions, and prescriptions based on sound economic analysis to role-oriented politicians responsible for policy making. In turn, it is assumed that because politicians are looking for efficient solutions to major economic problems, they will automatically take the necessary actions to maximize social welfare by following the impartial and well informed advice provided by their economic advisors. അതായത് പൊളിറ്റീഷ്യൻസ് എല്ലായ്പ്പോഴും ഒരു എഫിഷ്യൻ്റ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള സൊല്യൂഷനാണ് സെർച്ച് ചെയ്തുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുന്നത് നമ്മുടെ എക്കണോമിക് പ്രോബ്ലംസ് സോൾവ് ചെയ്യാൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ട്. സോ ദേ വിൽ ഓട്ടോമാറ്റിക്കലി ടേക്ക് ദ നെസസറി ആക്ഷൻസ്. അതിന് വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് അവർ നെസസറി ആക്ഷൻസ് എടുക്കുകയും അതിലൂടെ ഒരു മാക്സിമം സോഷ്യൽ വെൽഫെയർ അറ്റൈൻ ചെയ്യാൻ വേണ്ട കാര്യങ്ങൾ തീരുമാനിക്കുകയും ചെയ്യുന്നുണ്ട്. The traditional economist view of the policy making process is illustrated in the figure. So in this figure, we can clearly understood that the economists advise, predictions and perceptions, then turns to the policy maker, and the policy maker choice of policy, then policy actions and implementations, then finally to take policy outcomes. So the policy maker mainly divided into society-centered forces, that is classes, industry groups, political parties and voters, and the state-centered forces like technocrats, bureaucrats, state interests, etc. Then influence on policy choice. The conventional approach to the analysis of policy making traditionally adopted the approach of Tinbergen in 1952 and Thale in 1956. For example, in the traditional optimizing approach pioneered by Thale, the policy maker is modeled as a benevolent social planner whose only concern is to maximize social welfare. Thus, the conventional normative approach to the analysis of economic policy treats the government as exogenous to the economy. Its only interest is in steering the economy towards the best possible outcome. Economic policy analysis is reduced to a technical exercise in maximization subject to constraint. From a new political economy perspective, policymakers will be heavily influenced by powerful societal and state-centered forces rather than acting impartially on the advice of economists. Therefore, the theoretical insights and policy advice based on those insights that economists can offer are mediated through a political system that reflects a balance of conflicting interests that inevitably arise in a country consisting of heterogeneous individuals. Next, in the society-centered approach, various groups exert pressure on the policymaker to supply policies that will benefit them directly or indirectly, while neo-Marxists typically focus on class struggle and the power of the capitalist classes. The new political economy literature highlights the influence of industry groups, for example, farmers, political parties, and voters. New political economy ലിറ്ററേച്ചർ ഹൈലൈറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നത് കൂടുതലായിട്ടും ഈ ഫാമേഴ്സിൻ്റെ ഇൻഫ്ലുവൻസ്, ഇൻഡസ്ട്രി ഗ്രൂപ്പ്സിൻ്റെ ഇൻഫ്ലുവൻസ്, പൊളിറ്റിക്കൽ പാർട്ടീസ് ആൻഡ് വോട്ടേഴ്സിൻ്റെ ഇൻഫ്ലുവൻസ്, അതിനൊക്കെയാണ് അവർ കൂടുതലായിട്ട് ഹൈലൈറ്റ് കൊടുക്കുന്നത്. സോ ഇൻ ദ സ്റ്റേറ്റ് സെൻറ്റേർഡ് അപ്രോച്ച്, എംഫസിസ് ഓൺ ദി റോൾ ഓഫ് ടെക്നോക്രാറ്റ്സ് ഈസ് ഇക്വലന്റ് ടു അക്സെപ്റ്റിംഗ് ദ ബെനവലന്റ് ഡിക്റ്റേറ്റർ അസംഷൻ. ഇൻ കോൺട്രാസ്റ്റ്, the new political economy literature focuses on the impact that bureaucrats and state interest exert on the policy maker. ഇവിടെ സ്റ്റേറ്റ് സെൻറ്റേർഡ് അപ്രോച്ചിൽ ന്യൂ പൊളിറ്റിക്കൽ എക്കോണമി ലിറ്ററേച്ചർ ഫോക്കസ് ചെയ്യുന്നത് പ്രധാനമായിട്ടും ബ്യൂറോക്രാറ്റ്സ് ആൻഡ് സ്റ്റേറ്റ് ഇൻട്രസ്റ്റ് ആൻഡ് എക്സേർട്ട് ഓൺ ദി പോളിസി മേക്കേഴ്സിനൊക്കെയാണ്. സോ ദ ട്രഡീഷണൽ അപ്രോച്ച് ടു ദ പോളിസി മേക്കിംഗ് പ്രോസസ് അഡോപ്റ്റഡ് ബൈ എക്കോണമിസ്റ്റ് വാസ് നീറ്റ്ലി സമ്മറൈസ്ഡ് ബൈ ടോണി കില്ലിക് ഇൻ 1976, many years ago, in a critique of the possibilities of development planning. Economists have adopted a rational actor model of politics. This would have as see governments as composed of publicly spirited, knowledgeable, and role-oriented politicians, clear and united in their objectives, choosing those policies which will achieve optimal results for the national interest, willing and able to do beyond a short-term point of view. Governments are stable in largely undifferentiated societies, widening a centralized concentration of power and a relatively unquestioned authority, generally capable of achieving the results they desire from a given policy decision. In reality, Societies are often fragmented and heterogeneous, especially if there are significant religious, ethnic, linguistic, and geographical divides compounded by extreme inequalities of income and wealth. As a result, governments will frequently be preoccupied with conflict management, representing particular rather than general interest, responding to a constantly shifting balance of preferences. So, in such a world, concepts such as the national interest and social welfare function have little operational meaning. Decision making in the face of major social divisions becomes a balancing act rather than a search for optima, a process of conflict resolution in which social tranquility and the maintenance of power is a basic concern rather than the maximization of the rate of growth. By Killick in 1976. So, in the modeling, politico-economic relationships, the new political macroeconomics views the government as standing at the center of the interaction between political and economic forces. Once this endogenous view of government is adopted, the welfare maximizing approach to economic policy formulation associated with the normative approach is no longer logically possible. See Frey 1978. So, in given politicians are responsible for the choice and implementation of economic policy, and their behavior will clearly be shaped by the various institutional constraints that make up the political system. Accordingly, a politico-economic approach to the analysis of macroeconomic phenomena and policy highlights the incentives which confront politicians and influence their policy choices. Next, we are going to discuss the role of government. What governments do or do not do will obviously have an important impact on economic growth and stability. Fiscal, monetary, and exchange rate policies, along with the policies towards international trade, competition, regulation, the labor market, education, technology, healthcare, and the provision of key institutions such as property rights, all have a profound influence on economic performance. During the 19th century, the economic role of government as measured by government expenditure as a percentage of GDP was around 10%. By 1996, the government expenditure to GDP ratio had risen to an average of 45% in developed OECD countries, see Tansi and Shukenchet 2000. These are the major factors. This expanding role of government activity in all countries during the 20th century reflects the influence of several factors. In particular, the first one, the impact of two world wars, and the second point, the Great Depression and subsequent Keynesian Revolution. The third point related to the initial post in 1945 influence of the Soviet state-led model of development. And the fourth point, rising military expenditures associated with the Cold War and global ideological competition between the USA and the USSR. And the fifth point, the influence of socialist humanitarian thinking and a growing concern for greater equity via income redistribution. And the sixth point, the rise of welfare state capitalism. And the seventh one, the general recognition by economists of a wider range of important market failures beyond those initially identified by Adam Smith, particularly widespread distortions created by externalities, imperfect information, and the problems of aggregate instability by Stiglitz 2000 and 2002. Here we have to note that at the beginning of the 20th century, the role of the state in the economic sphere was minimal. However, over the past 100 years, we have witnessed a dramatic change in the balance of economics, vision of the appropriate role of government in economic affairs. For the first 75 years of the 20th century, the role of the state expanded. But during the last quarter of the 20th century, there has been a marked change in economics thinking on the desirability of this trend. So, this change in large part reflects the fact that over the past 25 years, there has been an unmistakable convergence of benefits among economists in the power of market economy to deliver rising living standards compared to any non-alternative. Then, what should be the role of government in an economy? Here the question, this important question has been debated throughout history and permeates all important public policy issues. The current borders of the state have been mainly determined by historical events combined with developments in economic analysis that recognize the importance of both market failure and government failure. While the 1950s and 60s represent the high watermark of economists' belief in the capacity of governments to correct market failures, the 1970s and 1980s witnessed increasing skepticism about the expanding role of government and so a return of economists' faith in markets. Among economists, there was a growing recognition of various forms of government failures. The state was doing much more, but doing it less well. Even in the case where a government is attempting to act as a benevolent social planner and endeavors to correct market failures, it must do so via the use of agents, that is, bureaucrats, who actually implement the strategy. Because these agents are likely to be self interested and difficult to monitor, government interventions invariably provide opportunities for rent seeking behavior and corruption. From the 1970s onwards, the debate on market failure versus government failure gathered momentum and became a key feature of the economic literature. Many economists influenced by the critique of economics, such as Peter Boer, Milton Friedman, James Buchanan, Frederick von Hayek, Robert Lucas, Jr., and Annie Kreuzer, began to accept that the state was trying to do too much. In many countries, this had deleterious effect on the efficient functioning of markets, economic growth, and stability. The idea of government acting as a benevolent social guardian and the dubious assumption that state agencies are populated by selfless bureaucrats had been severely eroded by experience. This does not imply that capitalism is a perfect system, that markets always work efficiently, or that there is not an important role for government. But it does mean that throughout the world, governments have come to plan less, to own less, and to regulate less, allowing instead the frontiers of the market to expand. Eugene and Stanislaw 1999, Markets and Effective Accountable Government is complementary. See World Bank in 1997, Snowdown and Stiglitz 2002. And the fourth point, politicians and stabilization policy. This Downsian view of politicians indicates that governments should be viewed as endogenous in macroeconomic models. Downs in 1957. According to Frey in 1978, the traditional Keynesian circular flow model needs to be modified to take account of self-interested government behavior. The politico-economic system resulting from this modification is illustrated in figure 5.2. So there is no doubt that following the Keynesian revolution, voters have increasingly held governments responsible for the state of the economy. But in choosing to whom they will delegate decision making power, voters are faced with a principal agent problem since the agent, that is, government, may have different preferences which it can conceal from the imperfectly informed voters. As is evident from the figure 5.1, in the politico-economic circular flow model, politicians are seen to be driven by a balance of both ideological and re-election considerations. Voters evaluate politicians on the basis of how successful they have been in achieving the desirable economic goals such as high employment, low inflation, and rapid growth of real disposable incomes. The state of the economy in the immediate pre-election period is crucial, and the politicians are obviously aware that in order to survive in government, it is preferable to have a buoyant economy. If economic conditions are unfavorable, voters may well choose to elect the opposition party and the incumbents lose office. Meanwhile, the opposition party makes attractive promises to the electorate. Recall, for example, George Bush's famous in 1988 pre-election pledge, "Read my lips, no new taxes." Hence, economic conditions influence election results, and the incentive to get elected directly influences the choices and use of macroeconomic policies. Then politicians are also driven by partisan considerations, but ideological programs cannot be implemented unless parties first of all win or maintain power. During the past 25 years, a considerable amount of empirical work has been undertaken to test the importance of key macroeconomic variables such as inflation, unemployment, and the growth of disposable income for the popularity of governments. So, this work indicates that such macroeconomic variables are statistically significant and have an important influence on election outcomes. See Kramer in 1971, Tufte in 1975-78, Mosley in 1978, Fair in 1988, Schneider and Frey in 1988. So given that incumbent politicians occupy a position similar to that of a monopolist with respect to the supply of policies, it is hardly surprising that they may often succumb to temptation and use discretionary policies in order to maximize their re-election prospects. So during the past 20 years, also economists have produced a rich array of politico-economic models which incorporate many of these considerations. The interdependence between the economy and the polity is now a well-established area of research for economists interested in identifying the underlying causes of aggregate instability. Then, this research has attempted to answer a number of interesting questions. For example, how important are economic factors in influencing voter choice? Frey and Canada in 1978 and 78. Then the second question, do opportunistic politicians manipulate the economy for political profit by Northas in 1975? The third question, do ideological, that is partisan, considerations lead to political parties producing a differentiated products? By Hibbs in 1977. And the fourth question, can political cycles exist in a world of rational, non-myopic voters and economic agents? Alensina in 1987, Rogoff and Sibot in 1988. Does the empirical evidence provide support for politico-economic models? Alensina and Robini with Cohen in 1997. And the last question, what are the policy implications of such models? So, in what follows, we shall show how economists have attempted to answer these and other questions. And the next point, alternative approaches to the political business cycle. An overview in the theoretical literature on the political business cycle, which has developed since mid 1970s, and we can distinguish four main approaches which have evolved in two separate phases. The assumptions underlying these four different approaches are summarized in table 5.1. So during the first phase, in the mid to late 1970s, nor thus in 1975, reawakened interest in this area by developing an opportunistic model of the political business cycle. This was followed by Hibbs in 1977, who emphasized the ideological rather than office motivated considerations. However, both the Northas and Hibbs models, that is, the old political macroeconomies, were swept aside somewhat during the so-called rational expectations revolution, which dominated macroeconomic discussions during the mid to late 1970s. After a period of relative neglect, second phase of politico-economic models emerged in the mid 1980s, and research in this area has continued to flourish ever since. Due to the influence of new classical theorists, these new models incorporate the assumption of rational economic agents and voters. While economists such as Rogoff and Sibot in 1988 developed rational opportunistic models, Alesina in 1987 produced a rational partition theory, that is the new political macroeconomics. In what follows, we shall examine all four these approaches plus the hybrid model of Frey and Canada in 1978 and 78b, each of which attempts to endogenize the influence of political behavior on the macroeconomy. The next, the Northus opportunistic model. The Northus opportunistic model, the model literature on political business cycle, was stimulated by the seminal paper of the Northus in 1975. In the electoral model popularized by Northus, the party in power chooses economic policies during its incumbency which maximize its plurality at the next election. Since voters are influenced by a government's macroeconomic performance before an election, politicians will be tempted to manipulate policy instruments so that policy outcomes are most favorable around the election period. The important consequence of such behavior is that policies are implemented in democracies which are biased against future generations. So, Lindbergh in 1976 and McRae in 1977. Thus, while elections and electoral competition are necessary to increase the accountability of government, they are also likely to introduce potentially damaging distortions into the policy making process. In producing this result, Northus makes a number of important assumptions. Then, major assumptions. N1. The political system contains two parties, between which there has been complete policy convergence as predicted by the median voter theorem of Downs in 1957. And N2, both parties are interested in maximizing political profit rather than engaging in ideological programs. Only election outcomes matter to these opportunistic non-partisan politicians. N3, the timing of elections is exogenously fixed. N4, individual voters are identical and have aggregate unemployment UT and inflation P star T in their preference functions, and low inflation and unemployment rates are preferred. Policymakers are fully informed of voters' preferences but have no specific preferences with respect to inflation and unemployment. N5. Voters make political choices based on the past performance of incumbent politicians in managing the economy during their term of office. Not only are voters retrospective in their voting behavior, they have no foresight, they also have a decaying memory, a high discount rate on past economic performance. That is, they are myopic. N6. The macroeconomic system can be described by an expectations augmented Phillips curve where the short-run trade-off is less favorable than the long-run trade-off. Voters are ignorant of the macroeconomic framework. N7. Expectations of inflation P star T are formed adaptively, that is, agents are backward looking. Then N8. Policymakers can control the level of unemployment by manipulating aggregate demand via fiscal and monetary policies. Northus assumes N4 that policy decisions will be based on the observed aggregate voting function BT, which reflects individual preferences. And this is described by the equation. Here, governments seeking to win elections will endeavor to manipulate the economy towards the highest feasible vote contour so as to coincide with the election period. The macroeconomic framework adopted by Northus involves an expectations augmented Phillips curve framework summarized by equations 10.2 to 10.5. Expectations augmented Phillips curve Pt star is equal to function of ut plus lambda Pte. This is the first equation. Then adaptive expectation hypothesis Pte minus Pt minus 1 raised to e is equal to alpha into Pt minus 1 minus Pet minus 1, and alpha is greater than 0. Then the equilibrium condition Pt is equal to Pte. Then the long run Phillips curve trade-off shows an equation Pt star is equal to function of u divided by 1 minus lambda. So Northus assumes that 1 is greater than 0 and which yields a long run Phillips curve which is less favorable, that is steeper than short run relationship. So in figure 10.3 the equation, the short run curves are indicated by Sg, Sw and Sm, and the position of each curve depends on the expected rate of inflation. The long run curve is labeled as LRPC. If the coefficient is unity, the Phillips curve becomes vertical line and the natural rate of unemployment. See Friedman. However, Northus notes a vertical long run Phillips curve makes no difference in principle to the substantial conclusions of the model. Next, we give importance to the Heaps partisan model. In the North's model, there is policy convergence in that all governments behave in the same opportunistic way and all voters are assumed to have identical preferences over inflation and unemployment. An alternative approach is to view voters and politicians as ideological or partisan. Politicians view winning elections as a means of putting into action their partisan program, and heterogeneous voters will clearly have different preferences over inflation and unemployment. Heaps in 1977 examined the post war patterns of economic policies and outcomes in 12 advanced capitalist democracies for the period in 1945 to 69 in order to test the proposition that left and right wing governments have different preferences with respect to the trade off between inflation and unemployment. In particular, Hibbs argues that his evidence supports the proposition that left wing governments prefer a low level U unemployment, higher price outcome than right wing governments. In this equation, CR is equal to UR minus UR star whole square divided by 2 plus phi PT minus PR star whole square divided by 2. Then again CL is equal to UL minus UL star whole square divided by 2 plus phi L into PT star minus PL star whole square divided by 2. Here UR star and PR star are the unemployment and inflation targets of the right wing party, and R is the relative weight placed on deviations of inflation from the target P star T minus P star R star relative to deviations of unemployment from target UR minus UR star. The partisan differences can be summed up as follows. UL star less than or equal to UR star. Again, PL star greater than or equal to PR star. That is phi L less than or equal to phi R. So the partisan effects are further illustrated in figure 10.5, where RR and LL indicate the respective preferences of right and left wing politicians. Given the assumptions of a stable, exploitable Phillips curve trade-off, left-wing governments will choose a combination of PL and UL indicated by the point L star, and right-wing governments will choose a combination of PR and UR indicated by a point R star. Here, in this figure, the partisan effects are further illustrated in this figure, where RR and LL indicate the respective preferences of right and left-wing politicians. The x-axis measure the unemployment rate and the y-axis measure inflation. So given the assumption of a stable, exploitable Phillips curve trade-off, left-wing governments will choose a combination of PL and UL indicated by the point L star, and right-wing governments will choose a combination of PR and UR indicated by the point R star. According to Hibbs, different unemployment or inflation outcomes have important class-linked effects on the distribution of national income. The revealed preference of policymakers reflects the intersex of the social groups who typically provide support for different parties. Since macroeconomic policies have distribution consequences, Hibbs rejects North's assumption N1 of policy convergence. According to Hibbs, the empirical evidence supports the partisan view that a relatively low unemployment, high inflation, macroeconomic configuration is associated with the substantial relative and absolute improvements in the economic well-being of the poor. Because tight labor markets tend to generate income equalizing effects, we should expect left-wing governments to favor a point on the Phillips curve trade-off indicated by L star. Right-wing parties view inflation as more damaging to their consequently of upper middle class voters and choose the position of such R star. According to Hibbs, the empirical evidence supports the ideological view of macroeconomic policy making. The differing interest of various occupational groups is reflected in the policy preferences of left and right wing political parties. In an examination of 12 Western European and North American countries over the period in 1945 to 69, Hibbs found strong support for the proposition that the mean inflation rate is higher than the mean unemployment rate. Lower, the greater the percentage of years that Labour or Socialist parties have been in office. In addition to the static aggregate evidence, Hibbs also found that time series evidence for the USA and the UK supports the proposition that Democratic and Labour administrations have usually reduced unemployment, while Republican and Conservative governments have tended to increase unemployment. Hibbs also reports significant partition effects on the distribution of income and conclude that consistent partition differences in economic performance identified by Hibbs remain alive and well 2 decades later, and partition influences have had a profound influence on the working of the US economy. In this table, we can clearly show the partition influence on macroeconomic outcomes in USA for the period in 1948 to 2001. The macroeconomic outcomes are average unemployment, average inflation, average annual GDP growth in percent. The Republican presidents, then Democratic presidents, and the partition difference are shown. Then the average unemployment by percent, then the partition difference is 1.51, then average inflation, the partition difference minus 0.02, and the finally average annual GDP growth in percent, that is partition difference minus 1.22. Here, Hibbs argues that this is in line with the subjective preferences of the class-based political constituencies of right and left-wing political parties. And the next, the decline and renaissance of opportunistic and partisan models. The 1970s were a turbulent time for the capitalist democracies as the golden age of low inflation, low unemployment, and above average growth rate came to an end. The stagflation crisis of the 1970s also brought to an end the Keynesian consensus, which had dominated macroeconomic policy and policy making in the quarter century following the Second World War. In the wake of the monetarist counter-revolution, Lucas inspired a rational expectations revolutions in macroeconomics. By the mid-1970s, models which continued to use the adaptive expectations hypothesis were coming in for heavy criticism from new classical theories, as the hypothesis implies that economic agents can make systematic errors. In market clearing models with rational expectations, the assumptions that the economic agents are forward-looking makes it more difficult for the policymaker to manipulate real economic activity. There is no exploitable short-term Phillips curve which policymakers can use. Then, the pre-election monetary expansions, for example, will fail to surprise rational agents because such a maneuver will be expected. The rational expectations hypothesis also implies that voters will be forward-looking and will not be systematically fooled. In equilibrium. According to Alesina in 1988, the theoretical literature on political business cycles made essentially no progress after the contributions of Northus in 1975, Lindbeck in 1976, and McRae in 1977 because of the devastating effect on the rational expectations critic. The Northus model involves an exploitable short-term Phillips curve trade-off combined with myopic voters. Once the rational expectation hypothesis is introduced, however, voters can be expected to recognize the incendious politicians how to manipulate the economy for electoral profit. Given that US presidential elections are held on a regular 4-year basis, it is difficult to believe that rational voters and economic agents would allow themselves to be systematically duped by the macroeconomic manipulations of self-interested politicians. Moreover, it is difficult to reconcile the predictions of the Northus model with situations where monetary policy is conducted by an independent central bank, unless government can in some way pressurize the central bank to accommodate the incumbent government's preferred monetary policy. The Hipps model also has major theoretical shortcomings, especially with respect to the stability of the Phillips-Kerr trade-off implicit in his analysis. Remarkably, Hipps makes no mention of the expectations augmented Phillips-Kerr in his 1977 paper, even through the Friedman-Phelps theory as decade-old and by then a well-established idea, even among Keynesians. Then, the assumption of rationality also has implications for Hipps' model, since the output and employment effects of expansionary and contractionary demand management policies are only transitory in neoclassical models. The identification of partisan influences on macroeconomic outcomes will be harder to detect. Then, alternatively, Alt conclude that partisan effects are not permanent but occur temporarily after a change of government. In addition to the theoretical shortcomings of the early political business cycle literature, the North's model also failed to attract strong empirical support, with econometric literature yielding inconclusive results. A significant problem for partisan theories in general is the argument and evidence presented by Easterly and Fisher 2001 that low inflation helps the poor more than the rich. Inflation acts as the financial tax that hits the poor disproportionately because they tend to hold more of their wealth in cash related to their income than the rich, whereas the rich are more likely to have access to various financial instruments that allow them to hedge against inflation. In addition, the poor obviously depend more on minimum wages and state determined income payments that are not always indexed to protect against the effects of inflation. Snowdown 2004. Easterly and Fisher present evidence drawn from an international poll of over 13,000 respondents from 38 countries, and the responses indicates that the poor themselves are more strongly adverse to inflation than those with higher incomes. This undermines a key assumption of Hipps' model that rich are more inflation averse than poor. By the mid 1980s, the political economic literature had reached a new ebb. Zerowitz in 1985. So, in his survey of business cycle research devotes one footnote to the idea of an electoral cycle and refers critically to the strong and questionable assumption of such models as well as the lack of supporting evidence. The same neglect is also a feature of Golden's in 1986 edited survey of the American business cycle. Following a period of relative neglect, the literature on the relationship between politics and the macroeconomy underwent a significant revival since the mid 1980s. Economists responded to the rational expectations critique by producing a new generation of rational politico-economic models. Like the first phase of the 1970s, the second phase of politico-economic models consisted of opportunistic and a partisan version of the interaction between politics and the macroeconomy. In the next two sections, we examine the main features of rational political business cycle models and the rational partisan theory. Next, we are going to discuss rational political business cycles. Recent work in the political business cycle tradition has shown that some of the insights of Northus in 1975 can survive even in a model with rational expectations, providing there is asymmetric information between voters and policymakers. In other words, voters need not be myopic in order for politicians to generate political business cycle. Optimal policies are only likely in a world of political competition when there is unanimity about social objectives and symmetric information between agents, voters, and politicians. Since these conditions are unlikely ever to hold, politicians have opportunity to follow non-optimal policies, providing there is some element of imperfect information so that forward-looking voters are not fully informed about some characteristics of the political and economic environment. Incumbents have the opportunity of creating a temporary illusion of prosperity in order to gain favor with the electorate. So, in the rational opportunistic model proposed by Kuckerman and Metzler in 1986, Rogoff and Siebert in 1988, Rogoff in 1990, and Persson and Tabellini in 1990, Electoral cycles are created in policy variables such as government spending, taxes, and monetary growth, and such cycles made possible by temporary information asymmetries. Although rational voters aim to choose politicians who they believe can deliver the highest utility, they lack information on the competition of different policymakers. Voters acquire information on competence by observing outcomes. Therefore, before elections, the incumbents engage in signaling process which aims to persuade voters that the politicians in power are competent. Such signaling is always observed in the UK during the Chancellor of the Exchequer's annual budget speech, especially just before an election. Then, policy implications of politico-economic models and independent central bank. In introducing the new monetary policy framework for the UK economy on 6 May 1997, which established operational independence for the Bank of England, Chancellor Gordon Brown, in an official statement, provided the following rationale for the government strategy. We will only build a fully credible framework for monetary policy if the long term needs of the economy, not short term physical political considerations, guide monetary decision making. We must remove the suspicion that short term party political considerations are influencing the setting up of interest rates. Chancellor Brown's decision to grant much greater independence to Bank of England had its origins in a 1992 Fabian Society paper entitled Euro Monetarism, written by Ed Balls, Brown's economic advisor. As a former student of Larry Summers at Harvard, Balls was familiar with the empirical work of the central bank independence produced by Alesina and Summers in 1993. In a visit to the USA in March 1997, Shadow Chancellor Brown and his economic advisor met both Alan Greenspan and Larry Summers, and so was born the strategy to go for immediate greater central bank independence if elected. Since the non-optimal use of monetary and fiscal instruments lies at the heart of the various strands of the political business cycle literate, most of this work points towards the desirability of establishing a policy regime which curtails the incentives policy. Rogoff and Siebert define competence as the ability to reduce waste in the budget process, that is, competent governments can produce more public goods and transfers for a given amount of a tax revenue. Incumbents have the potential to create a temporary fiscal boost or fail to impose necessary tax increase which is popular with voters. Because the budgetary process is so complicated, the inevitable post-election tax increases need to finance pre-election boost are not foreseen even by rational voters due to their incomplete information. Rather than generating a regular inflation unemployment cycle, as in the Northus model, rational political business cycle theories predicts the manipulation of various policy instruments before and after election. An independent central bank. The temptation of incumbents to cut taxes and increase spending before an election in order to appear competent clearly generates departures from optimality. Hence, opportunistic behavior survives in rational opportunistic model, although such models give rise to a different set of empirical predictions compared to the original Northus model. In particular, because of rational expectations, any circles resulting from the manipulation of monetary and fiscal policies will be predicted to be less regular and of shorter duration. Finally, we should note that developing country governments appear to behave in a similar way to their counterparts in richer countries. In a study of 35 developing countries, Shuknats in 1996 found considerable evidence in favor of election generated fiscal policy circles, although the opportunities for self-interested political behavior are less in more open economies. Then, the political economy of debt and deficits. During the mid 1970s, several OECD countries accumulated large public debts. This rise in the debt to GNP ratios during the peacetime among a group of relatively homogeneous economies is unprecedented and difficult to reconcile with the neoclassical approach to the optimal fiscal policy represented by the tax smoothing theory. While countries such as Greece, Italy, and Ireland had accumulated public debt ratios in excess of 95% in 1990. Other countries such as Germany, France, and the UK had debt ratios in 1990s of less than 50%. Alesina and Perotti conclude that the two most significant factors, the first one, the various rules and regulations which surround the budget process, and the second one, the structure of government, that is, does the electoral system tend to generate coalition or single party governments. The main findings are that majoritarian elections lead to smaller government and smaller welfare programs than elections based on proportional representation. And the second one, presidential democracies lead to smaller governments than parliamentary democracies. Two types of adjustment are identified. Type 1, fiscal adjustments rely on expenditure cuts, reductions in transfers and public sector wages and employment. Type 2 adjustments depends mainly on broad-based tax increases and cuts in public investment. Here, type 1 adjustments are also likely to have a more beneficial effect on competitiveness, that is unit labor costs, than policies which rely on discretionary increases in tax. Then, political and economic instability. There are good reasons to believe that economic performance will suffer if a country is politically unstable. Frequent riots, politically motivated violence, and revolution inevitably have a negative impact on a country's economic performance. അതായത് ഫ്രീക്വൻ്റ് ആയിട്ട് റയോട്ട് ഉണ്ടാവുക, പൊളിറ്റിക്കലി മോട്ടിവേറ്റഡ് വയലൻസ്, റവല്യൂഷൻ, ഇതെല്ലാം നമ്മുടെ എക്കണോമിയെ പൊളിറ്റിക്കലി അൺസ്റ്റേബിൾ ആക്കുകയാണ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. കെയ്ൻസ് ഹൈലൈറ്റഡ് ദാറ്റ് uncertainty has a depressing effect on investment and productive entrepreneurship. Alesina's partition theory predicts that instability will increase the greater the partisan effects because widely divergent policies create uncertainty and destabilize expectations. It is also unlikely that reputational consideration will be important to government which feels that it has little chance of being re-elected. So in this situation, the incumbent has an incentive to follow particularly short-sighted policies. Since it is not concerned with the future, it is likely to be out of office. ഒരുപാട് ആർഗ്യുമെന്റ്സ് റേസ് ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ട് അലൻസീന the 1989 and finds a positive correlation between the index of political instability and Okun's misery index, inflation plus unemployment, for the period in 1973-86. So an exemption in his 20th century sample is the UK, which managed to combine relatively poor economic performance during this period, despite having a high degree of political stability. Then Alensina Drazen's in 1991 analysis of why necessary stabilization policies are frequently delayed. They consider a situation where two parties with different ideologies engage in a war of attribution and they each attempt to pass on the burden of fiscal reform to the other party supporters. The resultant delay and government inaction in the reform process lead to debt accumulation and crisis before one of the parties is forced to accept larger share of fiscal burden. As Dazan 2000 noted that the failure to adopt socially beneficial economic reforms or their adoption only after long delays is a leading example of the divergence between simple textbook models of economic policy making and real world experience. Then, considerable cross-country evidence now exists which indicates that stagnatage, the inflation tax, is positively related to the degree of political instability. In a study of 79 developed and developing countries for the period in 1971-1982, Kuckerman et al. In 1992 found evidence in support of their hypothesis that more unstable countries rely relatively more on stagnatage to finance the government budget than do stable and homogeneous societies. So these conclusions are also supported by Edwards in 1994, who found that the incentive to use inflationary finance is closely related to the volatility of the political system. In the extreme, hyperinflation may erupt. See Cafe 1991, Siklos 1995, Fisher et al. 2002. Then these are the major references. Gregory Mankiw 2008 Macroeconomics, Richard D. Froyen 2008 Macroeconomics Theories and Policies, Then Brent Snowdown and Howard Wayne, Levasik, Rosalind and Redman Alexander in 1982 Macroeconomics and Introduction to Keynes Neoclassical Controversies. Then Eric Pentecost, Rudiger Dornbusch, Hargreaves, Heaps SP, 1992 The New Keynesian Macroeconomics, Time Brief and Social Independence Edward Ilaga Publishing, Errol D'Souza, Fred R. Gley, Variant and Sebald, Benares and Sebald, Samuelson and Nordas, Robert J. Gordon, Edward Shapiro, Brent Snowdown and Howard Wayne and Peter Bernatskis, and Mervyn K. Lewis and Paul D. Mason, Jagadish Handa. These are the major references that relate to the macroeconomic theory and policy. Then thank you.